My dad said, "Light makes men weak," and forced me to live in total darkness after I hit puberty. He convinced the town I had a rare condition. When I escaped, half the community wanted me back. I was 13 when the lights went out for good. Not just in my room, but in my entire world. My dad, Roger, said it was time. He looked me dead in the eye that night and told me the curse had started. I didn't even know what he meant at first. I was just standing there, wearing my worn-out basketball shorts, holding my dinner plate, when he said, "You're not a boy anymore. It's in your blood now. The darkness is the only thing that will keep you safe." My name is Lucas Hayes. I live, or used to live, in a small town outside Tulsa, Oklahoma. We had one of those single-story houses with faded blue siding and a yard that was more weeds than grass. Nothing about it looked special from the outside. But inside, the rules were something no kid should have to live with. Especially not after that night. I don't remember falling asleep. I only remember being shaken awake by Dad's rough hand. The overhead light was already gone. He'd unscrewed the bulbs, and I could barely see his face in the hallway glow. "Get up," he barked. "It's time you learned." Before I could ask what he was talking about, he grabbed my wrist and yanked me down the hall. He pushed me into my room, but it wasn't my room anymore. The windows were covered with thick black garbage bags duct taped to the frames. My desk lamp gone. Even the night light I used to have was missing. The room was empty except for the bed. A lock had been installed on the outside of my door. My chest tightened as I looked around. "Dad, what is this?" I asked, my voice shaking. "This is what boys like you deserve," he said. His tone was cold, final. "No light. Not after the curse has started. Your grandfather had it. I had it. And now it's your turn." I didn't understand any of it. But I didn't do anything. I whispered. He didn't care. He slammed the door and turned the lock. The sound of it clicked through me like a gunshot. The first night, I cried quietly into my pillow until I couldn't breathe. My body ached from the way he had gripped me, and I found bruises on my arm the next morning when I ran my fingers over my skin. Not that I could really see them. My eyes were already straining from the dark. Every time I banged on the door, begging to be let out, his voice came back sharp and mean. "Silence, or I'll make it worse." By the third day, I couldn't tell what time it was anymore. Hunger gnawed at my stomach, and every sound in the house felt like a distant echo. I learned to shuffle across the room with my arms out, feeling for the wall so I wouldn't smash into it. My body grew clumsy, like I didn't even belong to it. My head pounded constantly. Sometimes I'd hear him outside my door, muttering about purity and fixing me. The worst part wasn't the bruises or the hunger. It was the feeling that my life had shrunk to nothing. I wasn't Lucas anymore. I was just a shadow locked in a room that reeked of sweat and fear. The only time I saw a light was when Mom cracked the door open to slide in a plate of food. Even then, she never turned on the hallway light, like she was scared of breaking Dad's rule. She'd whisper, "Eat, Lucas," and then the door would shut, the lock clicking again. I wanted to scream at her, ask her why she let him do this to me, but I could hear the fear in her voice. She was just as trapped as I was, maybe in a different kind of darkness. Mom's name is Sarah. She's not cruel like Dad. She's quiet, like a person who's been broken into pieces so many times she's afraid to move wrong. Sometimes I'd hear them fighting at night, his voice like thunder shaking the walls, her voice barely more than a whimper. I think she wanted to help me, but the second she defied him, she'd pay for it. I'd hear the sound of something hitting the kitchen floor, then silence. I learned to stop hoping she'd save me. Ethan and Sophie, my siblings, lived like none of this was happening. Ethan was 16, with a stubborn streak that made him Dad's favorite. He didn't have to follow the dark rule. He'd walk past my door with the TV remote in his hand, acting like nothing was wrong. I don't think he hated me. I think he was just scared of Dad too. Sophie, on the other hand, was only 10. She would sneak notes under my door sometimes, little scraps of paper with things like "Are you okay?" or "I miss you." Her handwriting was crooked and messy, but seeing those notes kept me from losing it completely. One night, I heard Sophie whisper outside my door. "Lucas," she said softly, "Dad cut your hair today. You look like a prisoner." My chest tightened. She'd seen me when he dragged me into the kitchen earlier, yanking a pair of rusty kitchen scissors through my hair while everyone sat around the table watching like it was some twisted family show. "You look weak," he had said, holding up a chunk of hair like it was proof of something. Ethan stared down at his plate the whole time, chewing without looking at me. Mom's hands trembled as she cut her chicken, but she didn't speak. Not one of them stopped him. Later, when Sophie slipped back, she whispered through the gap in the door. "I don't like it when he talks to you like that," she said. I pressed my hand against the door, wishing I could hug her. "I don't like it either," I whispered back. It was the first real conversation I'd had in days. In that moment, I realized she was the only one who still saw me as her brother, not as Dad's experiment. And it made me hate him even more, for turning our home into a place where the people I loved had to pretend I wasn't suffering. By the time I turned 15, I had learned to live like a ghost. I knew how to feel my way through my room without tripping, how to tell time by listening for the creak of Dad's boots on the floorboards or the sound of the front door closing when he left for work. I thought maybe this would be my life forever, until Sophie joined me in the dark. It happened 2 months after she turned 11. I heard her crying in the hallway as Dad yelled something about purity and the curse spreading to the girls. That night, her bedroom window was sealed with garbage bags too. When I heard her door click shut, my stomach twisted. Sophie wasn't as strong as I was. She didn't know how to hide her fear. She sobbed quietly through the walls, and every sound broke something inside me. One night, when the house was dead silent, she whispered through the vent between our rooms, "Lucas, I'm scared." Her voice cracked. I pressed my face close to the vent and whispered back, "I'm scared too, but we'll get out. I promise." I didn't know how yet, but I meant it. For her, I had to. That promise lit something in me that I hadn't felt in years: hope. I started listening more carefully for Dad's patterns. He always left for work at 5:30 a.m. sharp and returned around sunset. Mom usually stayed in the kitchen, cleaning or cooking, and she rarely checked on us during the day. If I could find a way to get past the locks and out of the house while they weren't looking, I could take Sophie with me. The thought became my lifeline. Then, unexpectedly, Ethan helped. I never thought he'd defy Dad, but something had shifted in him. One afternoon, he slipped a folded note under my door. "We need to talk when Dad's gone." My heart raced as I read it. The next morning, I heard the click of my lock turning and Ethan's voice whispering, "Hurry." He pulled me into the hallway, his face pale but determined. "This is insane, Lucas. I can't keep watching him do this to you." "And now, Sophie." His voice trailed off as he handed me something wrapped in a towel. I opened it, and for the first time in 2 years, I saw light. A small, cheap flashlight. The beam stabbed my eyes, making me squint and blink like I was staring at the sun. But the moment I saw the dull glow on my hands, I felt alive again. "Hide it," Ethan whispered. "Dad can't know. I'll try to find more stuff for you. But you've got to be smart." I nodded, tears stinging my eyes. "Thank you," I muttered. He looked at me like he wanted to say something else, but instead he just turned and locked my door again. That night, I turned on the flashlight when everyone was asleep. The light revealed the bruises on my arms, the way my skin had gone pale and thin from years inside that room. I hardly recognized myself. I stared at the reflection in a broken shard of mirror I'd hidden under my mattress and whispered, "I'm getting out. I swear." Over the next weeks, I started preparing, timing Dad's routines, practicing how to walk quietly, and saving every crumb of food I could. Every plan I made wasn't just for me. It was for Sophie. We were going to escape the dark together, no matter what it took. The night I escaped, the whole house felt like it was holding its breath. Dad had gone to bed early after one of his long, angry rants about obedience. Mom was cleaning up the kitchen, her movements slow and robotic. Ethan had slipped me a nod at dinner, the kind of look that meant tonight. I didn't eat much, my stomach was in knots, but I hid the last piece of bread in my pocket for Sophie. I waited until the house was silent. Every creak of the floorboards felt like it would give me away, but I had spent weeks practicing. I slid the flashlight from under my mattress and clicked it on, keeping my hand cupped over the beam to dim it. For the first time in years, I felt like I had control of something, even if it was just this little flicker of light. I unlocked Sophie's door with the bent spoon handle Ethan had given me. It took longer than I wanted. My hands were trembling, but the lock finally clicked open. Sophie was sitting on her bed with her knees pulled up to her chest. When she saw me, her eyes widened. "Are we leaving?" she whispered, her voice shaking. "Not yet," I said. "I'm going to go first and see if I can find help. I'll come back for you. I promise." It killed me to leave her there, but if I got caught, at least one of us would have a chance. She nodded, wiping her tears with the back of her hand. "Please don't leave me forever," she whispered. "I won't," I said, and I meant it. I crept through the hallway, moving like I had rehearsed 100 times in my head. The front door was locked with one of Dad's padlocks, but Ethan had left the key hidden behind the coat rack. My fingers were slick with sweat as I turned it, and when it finally opened, the rush of cool night air almost made me cry. I stepped outside, and the first thing that hit me was how bright the world was. Even though it was just a moonlit night, it felt blinding compared to the blackness I had lived in. My eyes burned and watered. I had to shield my face with my hand, squinting like I was staring at a spotlight. My legs wobbled as I walked across the yard. I hadn't moved freely in so long that every step felt like I was learning to walk again. By the time I reached the neighbor's house, I was shaking. My flashlight beam danced wildly across the gravel driveway. I banged on the door, whispering at first, then louder. "Please, Please, someone help me. My voice cracked. For a moment, I thought no one would answer, and I felt panic rising like bile in my throat. Then the door opened. Catherine, our neighbor, stood there in her bathrobe, her face pale with shock. Lucas, she said, her voice trembling. What on earth? Please don't tell my dad. I blurted. Please, I can't go back there. He locked me in the dark. My words tangled into sobs I couldn't control. She didn't hesitate. She pulled me inside, wrapped me in a blanket, and held me like I was her own son. You're safe now, she whispered, even as she reached for her phone. I'm calling child services. No one's putting you back in that house tonight. The next morning, I woke up in Catherine's guest room to the sound of voices downstairs. For a second, I didn't know where I was. The sunlight streaming through the curtains felt like fire on my skin, but it also made me feel alive in a way I hadn't felt in years. I'd spent so long trapped in shadows that just seeing the dust particles floating in a sunbeam felt like magic. When I went downstairs, Catherine was sitting at the kitchen table with two people I didn't recognize. They introduced themselves as workers from Child Protective Services. The woman with kind eyes crouched a little to meet my gaze. Lucas, we're here to make sure you're safe, she said softly. My throat tightened, and I could only nod. They asked questions, so many questions. How long had I been in the dark? Did anyone hurt me? Did I have food? I told them about Dad's curse, about how he said the darkness was the only way to keep me clean. The words tumbled out of me like I'd been holding them back for years. I could see Catherine's face tighten with every detail I shared, but she didn't interrupt. She just put a hand on my shoulder when I started shaking. Later that day, the police showed up at our house. I wasn't there to see it, but Catherine told me Dad exploded when they tried to ask questions. He said you were cursed, Lucas, she explained. He told them you had some kind of light sickness. My hands balled into fists. That wasn't sickness. That was control. Within a week, it turned into a full legal mess. Dad filed a complaint, saying Catherine had kidnapped me. He claimed I was suffering from a rare condition that made light dangerous, and that keeping me in darkness was treatment. He even showed the bruises on my arms, saying they were rashes caused by exposure to light. The lies made me want to scream. The community didn't know what to think. Half the people in our town believed Dad's story. They said things like, Roger's just protecting his boy. You can't judge what you don't understand. Others whispered about the way our windows had been covered for years. Some even signed a petition for me to be returned home. It was like no one wanted to see the truth. Mom didn't help. When the social worker asked her to testify, she just sat there with her hands in her lap. Roger does what's best, she murmured, avoiding my eyes. I wanted to hate her for it, but part of me could still see the scared woman who slid plates of food into my room. Maybe she'd been living in her own prison for too long. The worst moment was seeing Sophie. Dad brought her into court, made her stand next to him like a prop. She looked terrified in her pale blue dress, her hands twisted together. Tell them about your brother, Dad instructed her, his voice sickly sweet. Sophie glanced at me, then at the judge. Dad says Lucas has to stay in the dark, she said softly. It's for his own good. I felt like someone punched me in the stomach. When it was my turn to speak, I tried. I told the judge everything, but the words felt weak compared to Dad's smooth voice and twisted explanations. Every time I mentioned the dark, the bruises, the fear, I saw people in the courtroom glance at each other like they weren't sure if I was telling the truth. Years of silence had made me sound small. By the end of that day, I felt like I was losing. Dad's voice was louder. His lies sounded like the truth. And I realized if I didn't find a way to fight back, I might never get Sophie out of that house. Being in foster care didn't feel like freedom. It felt like being trapped in another kind of cage, one with polite voices and paperwork instead of locks and duct tape. The foster family I stayed with wasn't cruel, but they didn't understand me either. They'd leave the lights on all the time, like they thought I needed to adjust, but my body wasn't ready. I would curl up in the corner, covering my face with my arms because the brightness made my head throb and my stomach twist. Then came the endless medical tests. The doctors wanted to figure out if Dad's story about light sensitivity was true. They shined lights in my eyes, took blood, and ran scans that made me feel like I was some kind of lab experiment. Each time they pushed me into a new exam room, I felt smaller, like my voice didn't matter. When I told them about the dark rooms, the locks, and the bruises, they wrote notes but never looked me in the eye. Court hearings dragged on, and every time I saw Dad, he wore that smug look that made my blood boil. He'd shake his head like I was some poor, confused kid who didn't know what was good for him. Mom sat beside him, her hands folded, eyes empty. She never said my name, never looked at me directly. I wanted to scream at her, ask why she didn't care enough to stop him, but every time I opened my mouth in court, the words tangled up with my fear. At night, I'd dream I was back in the dark room. I'd wake up sweating, clutching the blanket like it was the only real thing left. Sometimes I'd hear Sophie's voice in my dreams, calling my name, and I'd have to remind myself she was still there, still living under his rules. That thought twisted my insides until I couldn't breathe. One night, my foster mom knocked on my door. "Lucas," she said softly, "Child Services wants you to talk to a therapist. Maybe it will help." I almost laughed. Talking to strangers about my nightmares wasn't going to help Sophie. It wasn't going to make Dad stop lying. It felt like everyone was pretending this was just about me getting better, but I couldn't stop thinking about her. She was still in that house, still slipping into the same darkness that nearly swallowed me. The breaking point came after another court session where Dad brought Sophie to sit beside him again. I could tell she wanted to run to me, but the way he held her shoulder made her stay frozen. She was wearing her hair short now, cut with the same rusty scissors. Her eyes looked dull, like the light inside her had been snuffed out. I couldn't take it anymore. That night, I sat on the edge of the bed, fists clenched so tight my nails dug into my palms. I have to find a way to make them listen, I told myself. Not for me, for her. If I had to drag every ugly truth into the light, I would. Even if it meant tearing apart the last scraps of family I had left. I wasn't just trying to survive anymore. I was going to fight. For Sophie, and for the kid I used to be before Dad turned our home into a prison. A week after that court session, I got a manila envelope from the social worker. She said it was evidence collected from the house, things that might help my case. I wasn't expecting much, maybe some photos or reports. But when I opened it, there was something that made my chest tighten. Mom's old journal. It was a small, battered notebook with a faded blue cover. I recognized it right away. She used to keep it on the nightstand next to her bed. I had never read it before, but now it sat heavy in my hands, like it was waiting for me to open it. I flipped to the first page and started reading. At first, I didn't even understand what I was looking at. The entries were written in her neat handwriting, starting years ago. The first few pages talked about me, about how the curse had started when I hit puberty. Roger says it's for Lucas's own good. He needs to learn to live without light before it consumes him. My stomach nodded as I kept reading. She had documented everything. The night he locked me in my room. The days he cut off power to the house just to test me. Even the nights when I cried so hard I made myself sick. She wrote about it like it was all part of some twisted plan to purify me. One entry stopped me cold. "Sometimes I want to open the door and let him out, but Roger says I'm weak. He says I don't understand the sickness. Maybe if I keep writing it all down, I'll see the truth. Maybe I'll believe like he does." I stared at that line for a long time. She wasn't just a victim in all this, she believed him. Or maybe she made herself believe because she didn't know what else to do. I wanted to hate her for it, but mostly I just felt hollow. I'd spent years hoping she'd step in, that deep down she was the one person who would save me. But now, I realized she was just another piece of his web. As I read on, her words got darker. "Lucas is thinner now. His skin is pale. Roger says it's proof the curse is fighting its way out. I'm scared of what will happen if he fails." I felt sick. She had watched me fall apart and thought it was some kind of test. She didn't just let it happen. She helped by writing it all down like it was evidence of my transformation. When I showed the journal to my social worker, she looked shocked. This is exactly what we needed," she said, flipping through the pages. This proves she knew what was happening and did nothing. I nodded, but my hands were shaking. This wasn't the kind of proof I wanted. I didn't want to believe my mom was part of this. That night, I couldn't sleep. I sat with the journal on my lap, staring at the pages. Every entry felt like a betrayal. The mother I had imagined, the one who secretly loved me, who might one day take my hand and say she was sorry. She wasn't real. The real mom was just another person who chose Dad over me. The next time I saw her in court, I couldn't look at her the same way. She tried to smile at me once, that weak, forced smile she always wore, but I turned away. She wasn't my protector. She was part of the prison I had fought so hard to escape. The final hearing felt like a storm waiting to break. I sat at the witness table with my hands clenched so tight they hurt, the journal in front of me like a weapon. I kept glancing at Sophie, who sat between Dad and Mom. Her hair was cut jagged, just like mine had been. She wouldn't look at me, her eyes fixed on the floor. I knew she was scared. I was too. Dad walked in wearing his only suit, looking like some model father who just cared too much. He nodded at people in the courtroom, even smiled. I hated that smile. It was the same one he used to give me right before locking the door. When the judge asked if I had any new evidence, I pushed the journal across the table. "This is my mom's," I said, my voice shaky but clear. She wrote everything down. Every time he locked me in the dark, every time he hurt me. It's all here. My lawyer opened the journal and read a few of the ugliest entries out loud. I couldn't look at Mom. I didn't need to see her face to know she was crumbling. Dad tried to interrupt, standing up and shouting. That's out of context. She didn't mean it like that. We were protecting him. His voice cracked when the judge told him to sit down. For the first time, I saw fear flicker across his face. Then it was Sophie's turn to speak. Dad put a hand on her shoulder, squeezing it like a threat. Tell them, sweetheart, he said with that fake warmth. Tell them about your brother's sickness. Sophie hesitated, biting her lip so hard it turned white. She glanced at me for just a second, and I gave her the smallest nod I could. Her voice trembled when she spoke. Dad says Lucas has a curse, she whispered. But I don't think that's true. I just think he doesn't like the light. Those words broke something open. Dad's face twisted, and he tried to stop her, but the judge ordered him to stay quiet. Sophie kept talking, tears spilling down her cheeks. Lucas was scared all the time. I'm scared too. I don't want to stay there anymore. I wanted to run to her, hug her, tell her it was okay, but I couldn't move. The courtroom had gone silent except for her sniffles. When she finished, my lawyer stood up and said what I couldn't. This is not care. This is abuse. And it has to end today. Dad tried to fight, yelling about family rights and lies, but no one believed him anymore. Mom sat frozen, her hands trembling in her lap, as if she finally realized there was no excuse left. When the judge read the verdict, my chest felt like it might explode. Lucas Hayes and Sophie Hayes are to be removed from the custody of Roger and Sarah Hayes, effective immediately. The gavel hit the block, and just like that, the weight I'd carried for years started to lift. Dad's face went pale, his mouth opening and closing like he didn't understand. His supporters in the back of the courtroom looked shocked. Mom finally looked at me, but I couldn't meet her eyes. She wasn't my safe place. Not anymore. As Sophie and I were led out of the courtroom, she grabbed my hand. For the first time in years, I felt like maybe we had a chance. We were free from the darkness, even if the scars it left would never fully fade. The first night in my new foster home, I couldn't sleep. Not because I was scared of the dark. There was no dark here. The room was full of light, soft and warm, coming from a little lamp on the nightstand. It felt strange, almost unreal, to be able to turn it off and on whenever I wanted. For the first time, I wasn't locked in. I sat on the edge of the bed, just staring at the lamp, testing the switch over and over. Click, light, click, dark, freedom. The family I stayed with, the Bakers, were nothing like my own. They talked to each other with kindness, and when they argued, it wasn't the kind of yelling that made you want to disappear. They treated me like I was a person, not a problem to fix. You can leave your door open if you want, Lucas, Mrs. Baker said that first night, setting a glass of water on my nightstand. No one's going to lock you in here. It would take a long time before I believed that. Therapy started a few weeks later. At first, I hated it. Sitting in a bright office, talking about my life, felt like peeling off scabs. But slowly, I started to see that I wasn't just broken. I was healing. My therapist, a woman named Diane, never looked at me with pity. She just listened. When I told her about the years in the dark, about Dad's voice in my head, she didn't say I was weak. She said I was strong for surviving. Sophie was placed in a different foster home, but I saw her every week during visits arranged by social services. She was still quiet, but there was a small spark in her eyes again. Do you think we'll ever be normal? She asked me once, while we sat on the swings at a local park. I didn't know how to answer. Maybe not normal, I said, but we'll be free. And maybe that's enough. Our older brother, Ethan, ended up living with another relative. He visited once, looking different, like he'd finally stopped pretending everything was okay. He told me he was in therapy too. I should have done more, he said, his voice low. I didn't know what to say, so I just told him I forgave him. Maybe I meant it. Maybe I was just tired of carrying hate. Some days, I'd catch myself flinching when I heard footsteps or when a door slammed somewhere in the house. The memories were still there, Dad's voice, the suffocating dark, but they didn't control me the way they used to. Every time I turned on a light, I felt like I was winning. Months passed, and I started going to school again. The sunlight through the classroom windows used to make me squint, but now I tried to welcome it. I wasn't the same kid I used to be, but I was starting to figure out who I wanted to be. At night, I'd sometimes sit by the window in my room, just watching the streetlights flicker outside. I'd think about Sophie, about Ethan, about the house we left behind. I knew the scars would always be there, but I also knew that we had made it out. That had to mean something. And maybe, just maybe, I was starting to believe that my life didn't have to stay in the dark forever.